Professor Ronald Richlack is a distinguished university professor and chair in law and government at the University of Mississippi, where he has been on the law school faculty since 1987. In 2019, he received the university's highest research and publication recognition, the Distinguished Research and Creative Achievement Award. His bio is long and diverse, and it would require an entire 40 minutes just to share all of his accomplishments, but I've attempted to winnow it down to only 40 seconds. So here we go. Professor Rychlak has served as Associate Dean, then a faculty representative for Ole Miss Athletics, go Rebs, is an advisor to the Holy See's delegation to the United Nations, is a member of the Mississippi Supreme Court's Criminal Law Reform Committee, serves on the editorial board of the Gaming Law Review, sits on the advisory boards to Ave Maria School of Law and the Catholic League for Religious and Civil Rights, is the author or co-author of 12 books and hundreds of articles. In fact, the Congregation for the Causes of Saints at the Vatican called his book, Hitler, the War, and the Pope, definitive. He has made appearances on every news station imaginable. He's married with 6 kids. His friendship with Dean Zarnetsky spans decades. And last but not least, perhaps most impressive of all, even though I don't know what it means, he is a member of the Order of Merlin Shield and the International Brotherhood of Magicians. Ladies and gentlemen, Professor Rychlak.
Yeah, I've been on the board here for about 11 years now. And we always have a dinner on Wednesday night and then meetings Thursday, necessitating the odd hour of this thing because we had a board meeting today. But on Wednesday night, I always have to bring a magic trick and do that's part of the gig. All those accolades, my wife is brilliant about this. So I would sometimes begin to talk by thanking St. Clair, as John dubbed her St. Clair of I'm at home with a broken toilet, 2 kids doing this with. But my wife was so great about this. There was one time I was at the mailbox and I'd given a talk in New Jersey. And it's coming up in like November, and I opened an envelope from this outfit I spoke to, and they had this promotion where if you donated between $75 and $300, you got a copy of Professor Rychlak's Distinguished Aquinas Lecture. I've never seen that before. This is really cool. I take it down to my wife, and I said, look at this. She says, you mean if they donate between $75 and $300, they get a copy of your lecture? I said, that's right. She said, congratulations, you're a tote bag. So, I never let accolades take too far. Disinformation. What I'm talking about today, and I've done a lot of work on this, and literally today in the board meeting, I got an email from Public Discourse. I'm writing a review of a new book for them, and they have the edits that came back to me, but it's mainly my work focuses on Pope Pius XII. He was the Pope during World War II up until his death in 1958. If you know anything about Pius XII, you probably or most likely know it from the book Hitler's Pope, a book about 20 years ago, and by the title you can tell, highly critical of him. My book, which is, I guess I'm on this page, on the Hitler the War and the Pope, was actually at the printer at the time Hitler's Pope came out, and it was 180 degrees different. So we held up production, and I got invited to the Vatican. What I was recounting last night was Zarnetsky was in the dean was in the office next to me. And Dean Czar was in the office next. And I got a call from the Vatican, and I'm kicking on the wall because I had a class, and I don't want my class to all leave, so I'm trying to get his attention. Finally comes over to see why I'm kicking on the wall. I said, go hold my class. I'm talking to the Vatican. The Vatican invited me over, and I ended up doing research that led to the book, Hitler, the War, and the Pope. Now, today we're going to talk about disinformation because that relates to a book I wrote in 2013 with a defector, hiring a defector from the Soviet bloc. People ask, how do you see through disinformation? The first thing you have to do is you have to get the facts. You have to understand what's going on. And that's what I did with Pope Pius XII. When I first started investigating this, it was a colleague of ours who said, you know, the Pope was a Nazi. And, you know, I went to the public library. I got a book. It said it was ambiguous leadership. Well, what does that mean? Next thing I'm in the university library, and there's one book that says he's the only guy in all of Europe who stood up against the Nazis, and there's another book that says he should have been tried at Nuremberg. How can that be? And this put me on a quest that went, probably 5-6 years before I wrote the book, but the work has continued ever since. I went back and started tracing, and I first find a letter from his office in 1916 where there was a question sent to the office asking about persecution of Jewish people. And the letter that came back, I can't say this is from him, but it's from his office. Catholic Church considers all men as brothers, teaches them to love one another. This law must be observed and respected in the case of children of Israel as well as of all others. The following year, the future pope was sent to Germany to be the papal representative during World War I. And there's pictures and stories and many accounts of him handing out food and blankets and medicine and caring for people during the war. He tried to negotiate agreements to bring the end to the end of the war. Didn't successfully end the war on the terms the Pope had provided, although really the terms that came about at the end of the war were fairly similar to what the Pope had suggested. During this time, Eugenio Pacelli, that's the future Pius XII, Eugenio Pacelli, stationed in Munich. That's the same town, city, where Hitler and the early core of the Nazis. These guys come back from World War I, and they were soldiers, and they thought they should have won, and they thought that the rug had been pulled out from underneath them when the government surrendered, when they didn't think they ever should have. And there's horrible economic situations going on right then. There's wild inflation. These guys don't have jobs. They're hanging around drinking, and there was for a brief period, there was a communist takeover. Pacelli's nunciature, the place he lived, got sprayed with machine guns. Another time he was held at gunpoint. Actually, it's depicted, this is a comic book from the 1950s, but, oops, yeah, that actually depicts this is when the communists took over and held him at gunpoint. That cross actually was bent by a guy who, oops, I can hear myself better now. That was thrown a gun and actually bent that cross. Fulton Sheen later talked about owning that cross. The Pope later gave it to him. This is the early formation of the Nazis. Pacelli, actually in 1921, there's a newspaper where he talked about this group that's forming. And then in 1923, he wrote to Rome warning about right-wing radicals, followers of Hitler in Ludendorff, who is now in the Marvel Universe as a villain, by the way, which is, I think, interesting if you guys are into the Marvel movies. But that's a real guy. He really was a leader, and he was he was a World War I hero for the Germans, but then early Nazi. Pacelli's there until 1929. 1929, he gets called back to Rome. He's going to, in 1930, be made Cardinal Secretary of State. And we have records of 44 talks. Professor Governor, how are you?
Great to see you, sir.
We have records of 44 talks. He gave 40 of them are condemning racialism or extreme nationalism or all the things that were fundamental. Really, the Nazis hadn't formed as such yet, so he didn't refer to them as Nazis, but the ideology of the Nazis. He becomes Cardinal Secretary of State for Pope Pius XI. Pope Pius XI, who, by the way, many critics of Pius XII will say Pius XI was a good pope, but Pius XII was a bad pope. But Pius XI said, Pacelli speaks with my voice, that they didn't disagree about virtually anything. Pacelli took over in a time of war. That changes stuff a little bit. But Pacelli was very clear. So he's Cardinal Secretary of State when Hitler gets elected in 1933, promising work and food. By the way, the Nazis are National Socialists. It was a socialist situation. A lot of times we talk about extreme right-wingers, even Pacelli used that in a letter. But it was a socialist sort of economic structure that they supported. Interestingly, here, I thought this, when I came across this, this is the Catholic population in Germany. You can see the dark areas, these are Catholic areas. The Protestant areas are here, and even up in Prussia, you can see the Catholic areas in that triangle. Then we go to areas that supported Hitler, the areas that supported Hitler were mainly the Protestants. The Catholic areas did not support Hitler well. In fact, the Catholic bishops in the 1932 or so denied communion to members of the Nazi Party. So the Catholics were actually very much opposed to the growth that came about. But after the Nazis came into power, one of the first things they did a boycott of Jewish businesses. You can see this headline from a newspaper: Nazis denounced by Pope Pius as anti-Christian. The Concordat, the agreement that Germany had negotiated, and it was Germany under Hitler, no question about that, but had negotiated with the Vatican, was violated by this. You weren't allowed to do that kind of thing. I have a whole paper on the Concordat, and so if we got into that, it would take another half an hour. But the Nazis certainly recognized the Catholic Church as their opponent. Here we see Goring: Catholic believers carry away but one impression from attendance at divine services. That is, that the Catholic Church rejects the institutions of the nationalist state. You can see this comic politic. The priest has his nose buried in a newspaper in politics while the lambs are being devoured by the swine. Here's another one. You see, the rabbi, you see the priest with the rosary coming out of his pocket. You see the rabbi. They may fight with one another a little bit, but they're doing it on our backs, the backs of the good Nazis. Here's the big Nazi refusing to let the industrialist, the priest, and the Jew pull back the hands of time. Here's the Catholic priest, or the Christian at least we know, who is carrying the Jew. This is the ugly depiction that the Nazis always used for Jewish people. Revealed at last: Freemasons, Judaism, and Jesuits. The Nazis are discovering, hidden in the back room. Hitler himself said, German Catholic bishops have quite recently, in a series of public declarations on which the clergy have not hesitated to act, stigmatized the leaders of the Nationalist Socialist Party as traitors who should be refused the sacraments. In these circumstances, the Chancellor is reluctantly compelled to remain away from the Catholic service. He was brought up as a Catholic, or baptized as a Catholic when he was a little kid. There's no record of him going to a regular mass. After about the age of 12, he did go once to a funeral. There's a picture, and they love to show this picture of him because there's a cross behind him. And if you're trying to associate Hitler with Christianity, there's one cross where he went to a funeral one time that often gets used. 1935, Pacelli, writing a letter, refers to Nazis as false prophets with the pride of Lucifer. 1937, he goes to France. This is from a Nazi comic. He's got his arm around a woman. The priest's not supposed to do that. It's clearly Pacelli. It's even labeled Pacelli. She's holding a newspaper, which is Humanité, which is a communist newspaper, so she's a communist woman. She's got the facial characteristics of a Jewish communist woman. The thing across the top, the Cardinal's journey to France. Down below, the thing it says down below, she's certainly not pretty, but she can cook. And there's a little, it even says anti-Nazi. I mean, you can tell that there. That's what they're doing. 1937 also, here he is in Paris. You see the Eiffel Tower in the background, the two reds, the red being the cardinal and the communist. Nazis projected the communists as their arch enemy. They're associating the church with their arch enemy when they do this. 1937, Pope Pius XI's encyclical, Mit Brennender Sorge, with burning anxiety. We now have handwritten notations on the early drafts of this. In fact, they've got something like 30 different drafts. It went back and forth between how strongly or how lightly they would tread when they were condemning Nazism. This encyclical, unlike any other, was written in German. And Pacelli was fluent in German from all those years there. It was also released in Germany instead of in Rome. And it was very much a condemnation recognized around the world, condemnation of the Nazis. None but superficial minds could stumble into concepts of a national God or of a national religion or attempt to lock within the frontiers of a single people, within the narrow limits of a single race, all those things that are great that God has made. They said that this particularly outraged Hitler because it suggested that the angels were laughing at him in heaven. He hated being ridiculed, being laughed at, and this suggested he was being laughed at. In fact, the Nazis suppressed it. They did this a few times. Where they would either suppress messages. After Merton, the printing presses were broken. People were arrested who distributed it. It was distributed, by the way, on bicycles on Palm Sunday. Priests read it from the pulpit, and then pretty much was never heard from again within Germany until after the Nazis fell. It was that strong of a condemnation. 1938, Hitler comes down to visit his buddy Mussolini in Rome, and they have these parade routes and everything scheduled. Pius XI and his Secretary of State Pacelli left Rome, went to Castel Gandolfo outside of Rome, closed down the Vatican, told the priests and nuns not to participate in any celebrations. The Vatican went dark. You know, Hitler loved to film himself going into places, and if you ever watch, but I used to watch, back when I was writing this, it was before the History Channel had discovered pawn shops, and so they actually did history shows, and so I was always watching these Nazi shows. My wife called it NTV, all Nazis all the time. I was wondering if I could still use that joke, because you still get it, because that was MTV's original slogan, all music all the time, and that they're not in any music anymore, I think. They had to reroute all of the parades. They moved out to Castel Gandolfo, and I forget what else I was getting ready to say. Oh, no, the pictures. Yeah, so there's all these pictures of Hitler walking around the Eiffel Tower, the Arc de Triomphe, all this kind of stuff. There's no pictures of him in the Vatican. Have you ever thought about that? He stayed away from the Vatican. It was a big embarrassment. The Pope said on the day of the Holy Cross, it makes me sad that the cross that's being worshipped in Rome today is not that of Jesus Christ. He also said, I'm out in Castel Gandolfo, the air in Rome makes me ill. I literally had a debate with a woman, Susan Zuccotti. It was on, years ago, it was on public TV, PBS. And she said, no, he really was sick. They really went out to Castel Gandolfo because the Pope was sick from the air in Rome. And I'm like, no, he very clearly was saying he didn't like the stench that the Nazis had brought into town. It was recognized, by the way. So this is a lead story in Reader's Digest from 1939, February 39. Nuns in Nazi prisons, priests in concentration camps, Catholic leaders shot, cardinals' homes wrecked. Americans read such news shocked at the barbarism of the Reich and are puzzled beside. And it goes in and talks about the Catholics as the number 2 victim of the Nazis. They try to present it like, hey, the Nazis were Catholic or whatever. It's not at all the case. When Pope Pius XI passed away, the delegations came from all around Europe, and they all came through and gave their condolences until the Germans came along. The Germans came and basically gave a lecture and said, you had a pope last time who couldn't see the future. You're going to get a new kind of pope next time. And everyone understood. They were saying, don't elect Pacelli. But the cardinals did elect Pacelli. They have the coronation, the event where he becomes pope. And the only European nation that did not send a delegation was Germany. They refused to participate in it. They were aware that he would do something like this with his very first encyclical. He wrote an encyclical condemning dictators, treaty violators, racism, and urging restoring of Poland. Those are all direct shots at the Nazis and at Hitler. This first encyclical, Summi Pontificatus, I spent a whole chapter in my book just talking, because it was his layout of how a pope should behave during a time of war. It's pretty funny. There's a new book out by David Kurtzer I'll talk about at the end of the talk today, and he completely dismisses this. He's got a 400-page book, and he spends about 3 paragraphs talking about this encyclical. I think because it just undercuts his thesis, but we'll get to that later. And we'll just go through some quick news stories. Nazi atrocities in Poland held affront to mankind. This from 1940, by the way. It's a newer reprint. 1940, Vatican denounces atrocities in Poland. Germans call it even worse than Russians. And I always apologize. Had I known these were going to be slides, I would not have used sort of a green highlighter at the time. But this is my earliest research. Pope is emphatic about a just peace, Jews' rights defended. When the Nazis moved into the Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg, he actually passed plans to the Allies about the troop movements that were coming from Germany. Now, unfortunately, the Allies didn't know whether to trust, not that they were worried about him, but they were worried about where he got the information from, whether it was a valid source. So they didn't really do much, but it's very clear from records in Allied nations that he gave this information. Afterwards, he sent open telegrams to the leaders of those countries, commiserating with them and promising them a better day would come before long. The New York Times, Christmas Day, 1941. The voice of Pius XII, his lonely voice, silence and darkness enveloping Europe this Christmas. The Pope put himself squarely against Hitlerism. That's the lead editorial in the New York Times, 1941. 42, Vichy seizes Jews, Pope Pius ignored. The American bishops in 1942. This was actually pretty cool. I went to go see Cardinal Spellman's documents in Dunwoody Seminary in just north of Manhattan in New York. And I saw the correspondence back and forth between Spellman and the Vatican. It's very clear Pius XII was collaborating. Here's one of the things. Then your lawyers, put your lawyer hat on for a minute. People say, if the Pope knew all of these things, why didn't the Pope reach out and make a stronger condemnation of what the Nazis were doing to the Jews? Why wasn't he using the bully pulpit? Well, play it through. What happens if he makes a strong condemnation? Within the Nazi-controlled areas, it's about like Mitbrenner Sorg. It gets read one day and then it's immediately quashed. The people who spread it are punished. So it doesn't go very far. And does it have any impact? They're always saying, you know, the Pope, he could have stopped the Holocaust if he just said some words. Yeah, I don't think so. You know, play through with that too. How much sway would he have had with, you know, when you're facing, you know, the Nazi leadership, trying to convince people not to do things. So the Pope is figuring out how to walk the fine line. In 1942, he made a Christmas statement, a strong Christmas statement. Again, you can see he's trying to walk a line here. He talks about hundreds of thousands who, through no fault of their own, solely because of their nationality or descent, face progressive extinction. He's talking about and people say, well, what does that mean? That's not really clear. He's not saying Jews are being killed. You know, you read the newspapers, everyone in America understood what he was saying. There wasn't really question about this, but he's using Pope speak. That's how popes talk. New York Times, 42. See, New York Times got it. This Christmas more than ever, he's a lonely voice crying out of the silence of a continent, talking about Pius XII. And if you think, because people always try to give attribution, they'll say, well, he was an anti-Semite, that's why he did what he did. If you think he didn't speak out on the Jews because he didn't like Jews, you got to deal with the fact that about 2,000 Catholic priests died in Nazi concentration camps. His approach to that was precisely the same. It's not like he was condemning the persecution of Catholics, but not of Jews. He was taking diplomatic interventions, trying to provide relief, trying to do what he can, putting pressure where he could, cooperating with the Allies. In fact, that's one of the biggest things that's come out since I've been talking about this. They gave out false baptismal certificates that allowed Jewish people often to avoid persecution. Vatican radio, boy, that's a long time ago. It's my wife and my son. My son's now 33, so that's an old picture. But it's when we that's from actually the Vatican radio building in Rome. But just listening to Vatican radio, you could be executed in Germany you weren't allowed to. It was a capital offense. Same thing with the newspaper. The Nazis called it the evident mouthpiece of the Jews and had joined the cause of the Allies. Goebbels, if the Catholic clergy can thus, this actually goes to, I'm actually trying to get to a different slide. I'm skipping over too much good stuff. I'm trying to think. I have a new slide somewhere. Mark Ribling has a great book, and there'll be a slide about it later, where he talks about how Pius XII actually joined in the plan to assassinate Hitler. And they worked with a lawyer who was also a pilot who could fly back and forth from Germany to Rome, and he carried messages back and forth. And it's the, if you've seen Valkyrie, it was the Pope's involvement in basically saying, I do not condemn this, this is appropriate, this is okay to do, so that the conspirators were able to go to other people and assure them that it's okay to join in this plan. Ribbling actually goes through the theological basis of explaining why it's okay under Catholic doctrine. I just think it's cool that they did it. And by the way, Joseph Mueller was the lawyer, and he got caught, and he came within literally moments of being executed by the Nazis and was liberated at the last minute. But you can see the Nazis didn't trust, didn't like the Catholics. This actually comes from Edith Stein, St. Teresa Benedicta of the Cross, who was a Jewish woman who became a Catholic nun. When the Nazis came to power, she was sent to Holland to avoid persecution. When the Nazis came in there, the Catholic bishops and the Protestant leaders got together with the Nazis and said, we know what you've been doing, and we're going to come out with a statement condemning what you do. And the Nazis said, if you do that, you're going to regret it. The Protestant leaders backed down. The bishops came out with a strong statement. Nevertheless, Goebbels says, we're not recognizing Catholic baptismal certificates anymore. So even if you are a Catholic, even if you have a certificate, if we believe you're of Jewish descent, you're going off, going to be executed. That happened to Edith Stein, St. Teresa now, and her sister. She got killed basically because of a statement. Now this plays out because there are 3 witnesses who testified at the Vatican that the Pope was on the verge of making a more outspoken statement regarding persecution of the Jews when this report came to him. And he picked up some papers and went over and burned them. He said if bishops making a statement can lead to, and there's debate about the number. On the high end, some people said 40,000. That seems ridiculously high. But clearly in the thousands of people died because of this statement. And Pius said, that's not worth it. When Hitler decided to invade the Soviet Union, there were actually some lower level priests who blessed it as a crusade into the godless Soviet Union. Pius made him retract that, would not do it. The Vatican itself did become a wartime sanctuary where there were Jews, there were downed Allied airmen behind enemy lines, there were AWOL German soldiers, there were anybody who might be persecuted by the Nazis found, including Gregory Peck in the movie The Scarlet and the Black. When the Nazis occupied Rome, they went to the chief rabbi of Rome, Israel Zoli, and said, you need to come up with 50 kilograms of gold within 36 hours, and if you do that, we won't be deporting Jewish people from Rome. Jewish community didn't look like they were going to be able to do it. So Israel Zoli, the chief rabbi of Rome, goes into the Vatican and asks for a loan of the gold. And the Pope says, and I don't believe they met face to face, but the rabbi talks to some people, they come back in the same day, it's just the Pope wasn't in the same room. The Pope says, as much as you need for as long as you need it. Well, it turns out, in fact, the Nazis were just getting the gold from the Jews. They got the gold, the Jewish community actually raised the gold they needed, and then the Nazis began deporting them. It was all just a way to get the gold before they started deporting people. And that's really when the Vatican became the sanctuary. And I always point out, I got to go one time into the papal apartment, and if my head is St. Peter's and the 2 arms are coming out here, I mean, it's about right here. There were Nazi soldiers right behind there, really close. I always think of them out beyond where my hands, out beyond the circle kind of, but they were right behind there. Oh, yeah, and this is this is based on a true story, by the way. Monsignor Hugo Flattery, and you got Gregory Peck to play him, and I'm always saying it should have been Carl Malden, because too many young people don't know who Carl Malden is, but there's an actor who looks a whole lot like this, anyway, but actually as it was, Pius XII, here he is overseeing this bread that's about to be distributed throughout occupied Rome on trucks that look like this, fed to children in front of bombed out buildings by priests and nuns like these two. Here we have a picture from Castel Gandolfo. These are people sleeping all over the floor because they're being sheltered, protected, as was happening in every seminary, every convent, whatever, throughout the town. In fact, this is up and down a staircase at Castel Gandolfo. They're that crowded. December 4th, 43, Vatican scores Germans, denounce a decision to intern and strip all Jews in Italy. Here, this is Ribling's book, so this is the slide I was looking for earlier. Church of Spies, very good book. There actually was a word of the conspiracy got back to Hitler, and he actually ordered a General Wolf to prepare plans to invade the Vatican. Wolf didn't want to do that. He talked Hitler out of it by saying, the Italians will go crazy, it'll be impossible to maintain our occupation if we invade the Vatican. Hitler's response is, okay, we won't go in now, but as soon as the war is over, we're going to do it. And there was even gallows humor within the Vatican about it. It was a very real threat. Upon the liberation of Rome, this was from the New York Times, on the Pope's direction, the Holy See did an exemplary job of sheltering and championing the victims of the Nazi fascist regime. Spoken to dozens of Italians, both Catholics and Jews, who owe their liberty and perhaps their lives to the protection of the Church. Pius XII said, for centuries, Jews have been unjustly treated and despised. It's time they were treated with justice and humanity. God wills it and the Church wills it. St. Paul tells us that the Jews are our brothers. They should also be welcomed as friends. President Franklin Roosevelt, writing to the Pope, talks about his deeply felt appreciation for the frequent actions the Holy See has taken to render assistance to victims of racial and religious persecutions. And once again, he didn't say Jewish victims, but everyone understood that's what he meant. Time magazine praised the Pope for what he had done. He's at this time, Israel Zoli, the chief rabbi of Rome I talked about earlier, converted and became a Catholic. He said it was not to thank Pius XII for all the church had done. It was he had a true vision of Jesus. That's why he converted. But he took the name Eugenio to thank the Pope for everything the church had done to save the Jewish people of Rome during the time. In fact, the Jewish community in Rome put up this plaque thanking Pius XII for all he had done to protect the Jewish people of Rome. Chief Rabbi of Palestine talks about how they'd never forget everything the Pope did. Pinchas Lapid, the Israel consul in Italy, spent 6 months at Yad Vashem studying the archives, concluded that the Vatican probably saved 850,000 Jewish people from the Nazis. My favorite one, though, all the dignitaries are coming through to meet the Pope. They said he kept the future Pope John the 23rd waiting for like 3 hours because Clark Gable, his favorite movie star, came to see him. There was a baseball player who said, we have something in common. We both used to be, and the Pope said, well, okay, they got to be, well, we both used to be Cardinals because this guy had played for the St. Louis Cardinals. But my favorite one is the guy who had been an American diplomat in Germany back when Pius, in the 20s, when Pius was the diplomat there. He said, Holy Father, I guess we weren't very good representatives of our nations. The Pope goes, well, what do you mean? He said, well, I wrote back to Washington, I think he wrote back to Rome, that this guy, Hitler, was never going to amount to anything. And Pius goes, you must remember, back then I was not infallible.
Yeah.
The Israeli Philharmonic in 1955 came to Rome and played a concert of tribute at the Vatican, posed for this photograph with Pope Pius XII. While they were there, they offered Montini, the future Pope Paul VI, a medal for all he had done to save Jewish people. He said, "I only acted upon orders from the Holy Father. Nobody deserves a medal for that." Similarly, when John the 23rd was offered praise for what he had done, he said, "In all these painful matters, I referred to the Holy See and simply carried out the Pope's orders, first and foremost to save human lives." Golda Meir, virtually every, I go through this in the book, but virtually every major Jewish group you can think of gave thanks, praise, whatever, at the time of Pius XII's death. And that's the background work I did when I wrote the first edition of Hitler, the War, and the Pope. So I knew what I was talking about. Okay, so the first thing for disinformation is know what you're talking about. Hitler's Pope comes out. Like I said, this was actually at the printer waiting to come out. Hitler's Pope comes out. I get I do a review of it because this guy's getting tremendous. John Cornwell's getting tremendous pressure. Why? Because he says he had secret archives he went to. The Vatican used to call these archives secret archives, even though they weren't actually secret. And if you're a newspaper person, and I've got a book, and I said I relied on secret archives, how are you going to check that? You're going to take, he's well-spoken, and he got review after review after review that were really praising him. Well, I knew better, and I wrote a book Inside the Vatican. I wrote a book review, and right after that, I say it must actually be read Inside the Vatican because these guys contacted me. Father Paul Molinari, who's passed away now, Father Peter Gumpel, who's like 99 now but still alive, they were the lead Jesuits investigating Pius XII's sainthood cause. And they said, we want you to, and this is when I was kicking Dean Czar's wall. They called me up and asked me if I want to would I come over to Rome and we'll give you a room and we'll lay out what we gave John Cornwell and you just tell us whether he was honest. That was the only instruction. Well, my wife immediately said she's going, and I said, "You're bringing your son then," because I've heard too much about Italian men, and I have you dragging a little kid around. At least it'll help a little. And that's actually that picture I showed earlier. Then that was from that trip. And every day they're going out. They're seeing the Colosseum. They're going to the Forum. They're doing this. I'm going to my office at the Vatican. But for the first day and a half at the office in the Vatican, I'm sitting there going, "Oh my God, what have I got myself into?" Because there's a table. There's 1,000 pages of typed transcript. The same transcript in handwriting. There's 2,000 pages of it. And these are testimonies people have given in the sainthood cause. And they're in whatever language the people spoke in. So if, I'm not fluent in every language. I've gotten better at some, but at the time, English I was pretty good at. And I'm sitting in this office going, I'm supposed to figure out what left John Cornwell in a state of moral shock, because that's what he said. Left in a state of moral shock, realized Pius XII was Hitler's Pope. So, a day and a half. They did have a copy of the book Hitler's Pope in there for me. And as I pick it up, I flip through it, he's got footnotes. I go, wait. And I realize his footnotes correspond to these transcripts, the typewritten ones, not the handwritten ones, typewritten ones. Okay. So I go to Hitler's Pope, the introduction, cites Vatican transcript page 229. Carlo Pacelli was the witness and talked about the height and weight of Pius. Okay. So the next one, in the first chapter, it's footnote 7, cites the Vatican transcript page 30. It's a professor who says there's no heat in Pacelli's childhood home. Okay. Next chapter, note 14, page 109. It's a sister who said he had unusual control over himself when he was a kid. Okay. And I keep going through this. And by the way, for the first 15 or 20, I'm waiting for the one, right? I'm waiting for the one to come up that's going to, but they're never, and by the time I got about to the 25th one, and I said, it's a fraud. There is nothing here, and there was nothing there. And so in my book, I have this whole thing. I've only got 4 of them here, but I got every citation he's got to those transcripts. And when he and I had an exchange once in a magazine called Brill's Content Magazine, and I pointed this out. And he said, I said, there's nothing in there that would leave someone in a state of moral shock. He said, oh no? What about the allegation of a flirtation between the Pope and his housekeeper? Isn't that shocking? What a dull boy our professor must be. And I said, maybe I'm dull, but it's got nothing to do with the Nazis, the Holocaust, or the Jews. And in fact, the whole thing was, there was a rumor that went around, the Pope heard about it, he demanded an investigation, he was cleared, and he was happy he was cleared. That was actually the full testimony. But there was nothing there. But he did have this quote from Thomas Merton at the beginning of the book. You know, when you open a book, sometimes there's a quote there, right in time, and contemplative monk Thomas Merton, Pius XII, the Jews, the whole thing is too sad and too serious for bitterness. A silence which is deeply and completely in complicity with all the forces which carry out oppression, injustice, aggression, war. Well, damn, how am I going to deal with this one? Well, it turns out Merton had written an essay on nuclear war, and he was ordered not to publish it. So in his diary, his private journal, he's complaining that he's been ordered into silence. He said, there are a lot of issues, including Pius XII and the Jews, Church in South America, treatment of Negroes in the U.S., Catholics in the French Rite, there are a lot of issues, and there's this big thing, and I'm being told I can't write about it, and it's too sad and too serious for bitterness. The beginning of my education, and I'm being ordered into a silence. He's being ordered into a silence. John Cornwell took these 2 paragraphs, used ellipses to link together the parts I haven't read there, and made that the introductory quote. If you do that in court, you'll be if you're lucky, if you only get sanctioned. I mean, that's fraud. It's academic dishonesty. But that's the beginning of John Cornwell's book. It was not until I got home that I realized something else. This literally is the dust jacket of the copy of the book that they had for me in that office in Rome. Because it was so funny, because after I got home, it was before you could pull the images off the internet and stuff. After I got home, I realized something. So I called them up and I said, could you send me the dust jacket from that copy that I had in the office in Rome? And I had to promise I'd send it back. They gave me like $5,000 to come over there, but I got to send back the dust jacket. So, this is a picture of Pacelli in 1927 leaving President Hindenburg's birthday party. These are Weimar soldiers. These are not Nazis. Now, however, any American sees that, they're thinking Nazis, because that helmet is what we grew up thinking of Nazis. But in fact, the flap in the British edition actually shows Cardinal Pacelli, future Pius XII, leaving the presidential palace of Berlin, March 1939. It was 27. 39 is the month Pacelli became Pope. They misdated that badly. I brought this up in the exchange with John Cornwell in the magazine Brill's Content, and he accused me of trying to censor photographic evidence. I'm not censoring anything. I will say this, though. He said, in fact, and he said, not everyone is so ignorant of history as to associate the helmet with the Nazis. Everybody I know associates. But let's suppose he's being honest about that not everyone would. What could you do? Well, the car door you see there is very square, typical of the 1920s. Let's take because by the 30s they were rounded. So, first of all, take out the picture in the foreground, who maybe you'd witness recognize he's a Weimar soldier. Then let's take out the car door. Then, to make everything a little more sinister, we'll darken it a bit. Then people still might recognize that chauffeur. Let's blur this image a little bit. Except for Pacelli's face, by the way. We'll bring it into better focus. I don't know if you can tell that. Pacelli's face comes into better focus. Everything else gets in worse focus. Oh, cool now because our chauffeur starts to look like an SS officer. We'll take that, we'll put that on the cover in the United States because that's the cover from the American edition. So you got the American edition or you got the British edition, which is dated wrong. So either way, that's, by the way, yeah, these don't happen accidentally. Pacelli's face did not come into better focus in that blurred photograph accidentally. And if you read the end of Hitler's Pope, you'll realize the message. Because the message is always disguided too. The message was, the last chapter is Pius XII Redivivus. The last chapter is John Paul II. It's just like Pius XII. John Paul II is leading us into a very bad place. We better get a different pope next time. It was all about trying to stop Ratzinger, is really what Hitler's Pope was about. I mean, almost nobody picks that up because it's disguised so well. But the last chapter is about don't pick Ratzinger as the next pope. That's really what that book was about. Of course, John Paul thought Pius XII was a great pope. Said so. Oh, by the way, minor scandal in my book covers. I'll come clean about this. The original cover was going to look like this. They got a picture of Hitler, said, can I find one of Pius? And I wanted to get one of him smiling because, you know, he seemed so stern. And then they got a graphic designer who came in and said, let's put him facing off. My grandmother, who's passed away now, but you know, she was in her 90s or something, said, why is the Pope smiling at that man? Dean Czar and I had a colleague named Bryn Voller who held it up and goes, is it two faces or is it a vase? So they stripped everything off, and this is the cover they went with the first edition. The second edition came out, and I was pretty excited because they got the swastika, they got the papal thing, and I got a tank. But y'all have military folks here. What's wrong with the tank?
I can't even see it.
Come on, somebody here's got to recognize the problem with this tank. We're talking World War II, and that's a Vietnam era tank, right? I mean, so they got the wrong generation of tank. I thought this was a military place. What do you? Okay, all right. Now, and I know we're running a little bit late, but tough luck. 2007, this article appears in National Review Online. Jan Mihai Pacepa, not Moscow's assault on the Vatican. He says, you know, the whole thing about Pius XII and the Jews and Hitler's Pope, that was all disinformation campaign that we created after, during the Cold War. Our Sunday visitor just asked me to do a new edition, that second edition you just saw, of Hitler, the War, and the Pope. And, you know, you can tinker at the corners, but this was like a substantive thing. And I spent 2 years digging into this. Does this make sense? And ultimately, this is Pacepa. Pacepa, highest ranking defector from the Soviet bloc, came over under the Carter administration, spent 3 years in debriefing, told the CIA everything where all of the Soviet spies were. Really accused major damage to the Soviet intelligence agency. He had been right-hand man to Ceausescu. He led to Ceausescu's downfall. Ceausescu put a $2 million bounty on his head, sent Carlos the Jackal over here to assassinate him, sent another team over to assassinate him. Never found him. He survived until last year. He passed away on Valentine's Day last year of COVID in his 90s.
Ron, he was the head of Romanian intelligence.
He was the head of Romanian intelligence, right. And right-hand man to Ceausescu, yeah. He was a general and again, the highest ranking official to defect. So here's Ceausescu with Jimmy Carter. He said he was at the White House when they're doing this thing, and Carter's saying Ceausescu is a new man of communism, he's a new face, somebody we can deal with. And Pacepa's there going, two feelings. One feeling is, holy cow, I can't believe the president bought this stuff. this lie we've been telling. On the other hand, it's kind of like, I guess I did my job pretty well, because his job was to convince Carter of that. But eventually, he couldn't live with it anymore. He was actually asked to plan an assassination on a guy, an American from Radio Free Europe. So he defected, wrote this book, spent his time, and then when I confirmed and wrote a chapter, he and I collaborated on this book, Disinformation, which talks about all kinds of stuff. Pius XII is a significant part of it, but only part of it. We talked about a lot of different disinformation campaigns that he was a part of from the Soviets. He always said disinformation has to come from a trusted source, has to have a nugget of truth, and he said no original documents. He said you don't want something that can be disproven. And John Kerry, the reason for John Kerry is Kerry came back from Vietnam and talked about how American soldiers were slaughtering innocent people in villages and stuff like that. And Pacheco said, he bought my story. That was Kerry was not part of it, but what you got to do is you plant the seeds all over, and somebody picks it up and grows it. And Kerry, I think unintentionally brought that story back. Potomkin Village, Zarnetsky, you referred to one today in our meeting, but the false front, you make something look like what it's not. That's sort of the history of disinformation we went through. One of the greatest ones ever was Khrushchev. Khrushchev, you can look this up, the secret speech. So Khrushchev gets all his people together and says, I want you to understand Stalin's not the guy we thought he was. Stalin was not a good guy, he's a bad guy. We don't want anybody to know this, though. We're going to keep this in this room, just among us. But we're going to change directions from where Stalin was. We're going to be a different kind of country going forward. But don't tell anybody, whatever you do. In the meantime, copies of this were delivered to the Mossad and the CIA. So the agents could come back and say, there was a secret speech, and look what I discovered. Think about how that plays back home, in Tel Aviv or in Washington, when, if Khrushchev got up and just said, we decided Stalin's bad, we're going to be different, everyone would blow it off. But hey, our agents found this secret speech you gave. That's disinformation sort of done in a really brilliant way. The Soviets were great about this. Here we see Trotsky in the picture. Trotsky later not in the picture. Or Stalin, he keeps bumping guys off one at a time off the bridge. I mean, here's the kind of famous one where as you lose power, you lose the picture. It's happening in America, in our commercial world, by the way, right there. Once again, the white man is one left. Think about it. Actually, I thought I took some of these out. I guess I left them in. This is one that was on social media in 2007. They put Putin in there. He wasn't really there. Why the disinformation about Pius XII, though? This is pretty cool. I got to speak at the United Nations right before COVID, a couple years ago about this. Think about the Soviet Union after World War II. Suddenly, they have control over these areas that had been heavily Catholic prior to the war. Well, in each of these areas, we've got Stepanak, Minzenti, and Wyszynski, and there were others as well, who were arrested and tried. But here's what would happen. The Soviets come in and they say, we're just like these guys. Sometimes their posters alongside them. They oppose the Nazis, we oppose the Nazis. Within a year or two, these guys were all imprisoned for collaboration with the Nazis. They had to undercut the Nazis. Professor Bonner, I thought you should have brought the whole class here. Hey. But these guys were in prison. And they also tried to get Pius XII at this time, but they couldn't control Pius XII. They couldn't do a fake trial or whatever it took to make it work. So for Pius, they had to wait until after he died. They did a play called The Deputy. And it's kind of brilliant in its way too. It's a fictionalized play that depicts Pius XII as a bad guy, basically doesn't care about the Jews. And you can poke 1,000 holes in the story. It's, well, of course, artistic license or literary license. We had to do that, but it's fundamentally true. But this is wrong. Yeah, but it's fundamentally true. And there's no way to counter it. And this actually got produced on Broadway. And then it was translated. It was done all over the communist world. It became a big thing. The author, Ralph Hochhuth, just passed away fairly recently. Kind of interesting. His best friend, his collaborator, best friend in the 1960s is David Irving, who was probably the best known Holocaust denier in the world. See you, Brian. These guys were lifelong friends. In fact, when Pachepa and I came out attacking Hochhuth, I got to hurry up, I'm going too long. Attacking Hochhuth, Irving was the first one to respond, defending him. I mean, it's amazing. British intelligence recognized in the 1960s that they were perhaps involved in Soviet communist disinformation. So we can't prove it, but it's looking that way to us. They, in fact, inspired this book, which is really about Croatia and Cardinal Stepanak. And when communism fell in Croatia, all the documents got uncovered, and it was revealed that this is all based completely on fraud. It was based on fake documents that were created just to frame Cardinal Stepanak. Yet, John Cornwell cited it as authority. It still gets kicked around by the critics as a strong book. Yeah, I'm gonna talk more. Okay, so the latest one, I'll just get to this. David Kurtzer. Kurtzer has got the new book out, critical of Pius XII. These are the lists of the books that he has written. The Pope of Mussolini, The Secret History of Pius XII and the Rise of Pius XI and the Rise of Fascism in Europe, The Popes Against the Jews, the Vatican's Role in the Rise of Modern Anti-Semitism, The Unholy War, the Vatican's Role in the Rise of Modern Anti-Semitism, Prisoner of the Vatican, the Pope's Secret Plot to Recapture Rome from the New Italian State, and the Pope Who Would Be King, the Exile of Pius IX and the Emergence of Modern Europe. This guy kind of has an agenda.
You think?
2011, he said, to talk about Pius XII as anything other than a moral coward, as far as the murder of Jews in Rome is concerned, is difficult for any of us. And he's got this new book that just repeats arguments that have been made and been refuted for a number of years. There's really not, this to me is one of the most telling things. This is a tweet that he did in July. This is a famous picture of Pius XII. After bombs have fallen, people have been killed, people have been injured, the Pope would, by the way, stand at the window as the bombs are falling. He would get money, blankets, medicine, go out among the people. He's out there praying with these people. Famous photograph. Kurtzer tweets, remarkably reminiscent of fascist and Nazi propaganda following the first bombing raid by the Allies of key Axis military targets in Rome, most notably the rail yards used to transport troops and supplies from north to south. They were not targeting the working class population. It wasn't propaganda. The Pope was out comforting people who just lost loved ones, who were injured and were suffering. I mean, I find this tweet in some ways more offensive than his book, or at least as offensive. There are 6 other books that have a publication date of 2020 or later. All 6 of them praise Pius XII. There's one book out, it's getting all the attention, Kurtz's book. It's the one that's critical. 6 others are not getting near the attention. So how do you counter disinformation? You get the facts, first of all, and then you do check your sources. When you're told, you've probably got people who tweet you, who send you stuff, and you just know it's wrong when you look at it, but they believe it. How many of you have also forwarded something and then realized it was stupid that you did now? Because I've done that a couple times, but I try to be careful about that. And if people send me stuff that I can tell is wrong, I'll send it back with a note and just say, yeah, you should check this. And that happens more than it should. So get your facts, check your sources. Pius XII said, if peace could be had by the crying of peace, peace, but no. It takes more than that. The Nazis despised the Pope. The rescuers cited him as their inspiration, and the Jews thanked him for all he did. They're the true witnesses. They're the people we need to listen to. not the people who are spreading disinformation. So that's my talk. Sorry, it took a little bit long. If you want to eat or you want to leave, you can do either of those. If you got any questions, I'm happy to take questions too. Yeah.
When the Israeli orchestra going to, give the Pope thanks and offer him a medal, all of that, how does the author of that other book, Hitler's Pope, explain that, or do we just completely ignore it?
For the most part, most of the critics ignore, for instance, my book. They just, the first thing I did, I looked in Kircher's index. Nope, doesn't address my book, so he doesn't have any of my arguments. He also doesn't address Ribling's book. He doesn't address Pachepa. So I identified three things that are really big. He supposedly got the definitive book, and I looked immediately to see whether he had what I consider the most important recent books in there. He doesn't, because they're positive. So that's usually how they deal with it. Usually they just don't address it. Yeah.
Does Kurtz or any of these guys have any evidence that you think is valid that supports their thesis?
Well, there's a kernel of truth. That's part of this information. The kernel of the truth is that Pius XII did not repeatedly use the bully pulpit like he could have, and people think, some people think he should have. And we can argue whether that would have been effective. And if you said, I think you can make an argument that if he would have said certain things, that things might have come out better. Things went pretty badly, so it's not hard to say, maybe it would have been better if you tried this. And I think you can do that. I think you made that. Here's where everybody goes wrong, though. They'll say he didn't make those statements, and he didn't do so because. It's always the because. Because he's an anti-Semite, he's not. Because he was a coward, he's not. Because he was reckless, he wasn't. It's funny because some of them are inconsistent. John Cornwell talks about him being recklessly disregards some of the stuff he does, and then other people call him being a coward, and other people call him an anti-Semite, and none of those things really work. So I think there's a fair debate about whether he should have made a more. By the way, I say that saying I would defend him in that debate, but that could be a fair debate, but nobody does that. Anything else? There will be a test on this, so just make sure you're. All right, thank you very much. I appreciate it.